and pose the first question to the group. And I want to just go in the order, alphabetical order for ease of use now. We'll start with you, Yassine. Can you share a bit about your personal journey in the public humanities and why the public humanities matter to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly.
Great. Yes. Hi, everyone. So my name is Yassine. I'm a PhD student here at Princeton. I've arrived at Princeton in 2020 during COVID. There was absolutely nothing on campus, and that marked me, I think, a little bit when I was here because there were no events organized on campus, or at least very few, and most of them were online. So I arrived here with the campus that was completely empty, and when things were starting to um, um, get on campus again and people were going out, we quickly thought with actually my friend Pierre, I think, who is here to, organize events and be able to, gather people again. And we saw that there was a lot to do there. So we started basically doing student club that there was just a French society, people gathering for food events and stuff like that. And then we quickly made that bigger. So we offered movies, and we saw that there was a big engagement from the community, from basically everyone on campus and also off campus. And that that little film club that we started at that time became a big film festival. James mentioned that the third edition is starting this year. The first two ones attracted about 2,000 people who came to our movies and other events that we did. And this year maybe I will have more time to talk about it, but we are making it bigger, so with 20 movies and also many other activities and partnership with many institutions, including the public library here. And this little film club became like a truly public humanities project that involves many people, many institutions, and we get a lot of funding too from both Princeton University entities, but also other institutions outside of campus. Yeah.
We'll circle back to that later, especially I want to talk a little bit and ask you a question about the K to 12 partnership, which I think is really fascinating. But maybe we'll pivot to John Paul. John Paul, can you share a little bit about your journey in the public humanities and why they matter to you?
Sure. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation. This is really exciting. As you mentioned, I'm brand new to Princeton, and I'm working here on a number of initiatives related to the publicly engaged and community engaged humanities through the Humanities Initiative. But before that, I spent most of my postdoctoral career working at the American Council of Learned Societies, and a number of the programs that I was really deeply involved in had to do with thinking about both the way that scholars could go out into the world and think about how their knowledge from humanistic knowledge interacted with other kinds of knowledges in different sectors beyond the academy by supporting a number of postdoctoral fellowships through our public fellows program and then the leading edge fellows program at ACLS, but also thinking increasingly about how we needed to shift that work to the pre-doctoral level and considering how organizations, learned societies, funders, universities could foster greater support for graduate students who were exploring the publicly engaged humanities, or how they could incorporate that into their work as doctoral students. And so I've spent 12 years working on that, and so it became very deeply personal to me because it was part of my daily life. I'm my colleagues at ACLS are still very much involved in that, and happy to see among the attendees, as you mentioned, Rachel Bernard, who is also very much involved in making that work happen across universities through different grant programs that supported faculty as they retooled curricula for onboarding students in a way that from the beginning acknowledged the importance of public engagement, or of at least speaking to multiple audiences as they're conducting their own research, to working increasingly with individual graduate students who were retooling the way they were producing dissertations so that they could incorporate public engagement, collaborative work, community engagement in the very building blocks of what a humanities PhD was to them or to their departments.
That's wonderful. Sarah, we'll head over to you now.
Yeah, thanks very much. And let me also say thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be back in Princeton virtually, although I'm currently in London. But really nice to be joining this conversation. So yeah, so I don't know, my journey in public humanities began with my career. I mean, as soon as I started, as soon as I left Princeton, I started doing it. So my reasons kind of span everything from the personal to the ethical. Personally, I enjoy it. That was why I started doing it. And I think it's really important that we bear that in mind, that that there are many ways in which this is a pleasurable way to do work. And I think for a lot of us, for me anyway, it's the best parts of teaching, it's talking about curious people, talking with curious people who are interested in the same subjects that I'm interested in. I mean, that's a lovely thing to be able to do. It's a real privilege. And then, but also, very early on, I started seeing the cultural trends that were already starting then and are now really embedded, that if academics withdraw from the public sphere, that celebrities and influencers fill that space, and there's a lack of what we might call self-congratulatingly, expert knowledge, but certainly a lack of specialist knowledge, and so all of that humanistic knowledge that we've already been talking about, and I'm sure people will be throughout this session. It seemed to me very important, even then, that it was something that I wanted to be sharing. And then increasingly with all of the challenges that we face, to see this kind of public humanities work. When you mentioned that I direct the Being Human Festival here, which is, as you said, the National Festival of Humanities Research. And I talk about that with the researchers who take part in it as public advocacy. I see it as directly advocating with publics for not just the value of what we do, but for a better understanding of what it is that we do. And I talk about the ways in which public humanities enables us not to explain the humanities or describe it, which is what we end up having to do a lot of the time, but to show it working, to show it doing stuff, to show it in action. This is what the humanities is. And the same way that we don't explain who we are by describing ourselves, we just, let people see who we are in action. The same, as Fitzgerald said, action is character. And that's what, the public humanities is doing. And now, given the environment that we're in, with, disinformation, divide and conquer tactics actively being used to undermine trust, also talking about the ways in which the work that we do is interdependent, intertwined with Enlightenment values more broadly, evidence-based thinking, humanistic inquiry, democracy, even the rise of the broad middle class. All of these things, the attacks on research and knowledge and universities are not happening, in isolation. They're all part of, of different, of an ideological contest and a values-based contest that we are all engaged in. So I think that public humanities work and direct advocacy work, like Being Human and other projects, make that work visible, and hopefully they can help us rebuild those public conversations, start to find ways to rebuild public trust that, that democracy depends on, that our systems of learning depend on, and et cetera. So I think as I say, it goes from everything from enjoying it personally to seeing it as, as a really vital project that I think I hope more and more people will get involved in.
That's a wonderful overview, from like the very personal to about as grand a reason for practicing the public humanities, the future of Enlightenment ideals and democracy and freedom. And so one question for you very quickly, because I had a question about the bio. How long has the University of London had a chair of the public humanities?
I was the first. So, and I joined 10 years ago. So, in fact, this will be my 10th anniversary. So, yeah, 2015 is when they established it. Yeah. So there are, and I think I might still be the only chair in the UK, but there are public humanities departments now. And I believe there are professors of public humanities, I think. Yeah, but not very many. We're still just a handful of us. So, I think obviously I believe there should be more.
Well, thanks for sharing. We'll turn now to Michelle May Curry.
Hi, everyone, and yeah, thanks so much for having me. So my entry point into the public humanities was during my PhD program in American culture at the University of Michigan. I was one of those lucky graduate students to be encouraged to do the public humanities over a decade ago, about a decade ago now. And teaching, it's one of those stories that might feel familiar to some of the folks that are listening right now, that teaching just didn't scratch the itch for me. I didn't have that aha moment standing in front of the classroom. I started searching for moments and disciplines, spaces that felt more meaningful to me, and I started working with a group of early career artists and curators and writers based in Detroit, and got to be mentored through that experience by the very amazing Carrie Mae Weems, who sort of took us on a whirlwind trip to Cuba to put on a show together. We worked together as a sort of an incubator, what we might in higher ed call like a public humanities lab. And we produced work together. I started working with my peers more directly, and I felt that turning one of my dissertation chapters into a installation and a gallery felt like that more meaningful, impactful, direct connection that I wanted around the material. I started then turning towards museum spaces, writing interpretive materials for museums, and then turned to scholar advocacy and public humanities advocacy work right around when the pandemic hit. It was my 6th year of my PhD program. I had the opportunity to work while finishing up my PhD program, and started leading Humanities for All through the National Humanities Alliance, which is a really incredible resource that we'll probably end up talking a good bit about today, that advocates, showcases excellence in public humanities, publicly engaged scholarship across higher ed. And through that experience, I started understanding the web of infrastructure that exists that supports publicly engaged work, both on campuses and in communities. And I'm talking there about, the great work that folks at ACLS are doing, places like the National Endowment for the Humanities, and all the many other spaces that fund and advocate for doing this work in that way. And now I'm at the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. I sort of hopped back from advocacy into doing the work, and now I'm the curator of DC's Commission on the Arts and Humanities, where I'm in charge of a gallery, where it's a public humanities, public art gallery. We are putting on 4 shows a year that engage the DC public around topics of significance. I'm also a grant manager for artists to receive funds from the DC public. And then I also run an art collection for the DC government called the Art Bank, where we're constantly creating materials that engage the public through public art. And so I've tackled the public humanities from a couple different angles in a short amount of time, and why it matters to me. I think there's an expression, there's lots of different ways of pointing your finger at the moon, right? You can point like this, you can point like that, right? You can say that about doing the humanities, right? You can have a lecture series, you can host a book club, you can create an exhibition, you can write a monograph, right? Of course, the discipline, the method is important. It creates a package that expresses something meaningful about the work that you're doing. But the public humanities broadly, I think, doesn't lose sight of the fact that it's the moon that we're pointing at, right? It's the connection with each other that's important, and that changes people's lives. So that's why it matters to me.
Oh, wonderful. Some of these answers, honestly, it was a very simple question that I just wanted to pose, and I'm really inspired by what you're saying, and also just tying this back to an event we had last night on science communication. I think expertise in general, people in the academy in general, we're all wrestling with this problem together. It might even help if we do it across disciplines, because we're going to increasingly be less disciplinary, we're going to have less disciplinary silos is my guess as we move forward into the age of AI. Cliff, you're up next, and it looks like you are in the library based on the books behind you.
Yes, I'm joining you from our Princeton room, which was a gift of the university. So thank you again. Um, no, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, James, and thanks everyone for joining today. So yeah, my personal journey into public humanities is in some ways kind of the same as everyone else here. There's a story that I keep hearing about finding connection, finding more of a sense of community amongst humanists, like-minded people, finding others who don't think of themselves as humanists, like still connecting with the work we're doing. That's a big story I think worth telling. And my story will echo some of that. But I'll add like the strangeness of my trajectory too, as like a faculty member who then left academia to go into the world of libraries, which is I think pretty distinctive. So I guess I think I first discovered public humanities before there was like a name for it, at least in my universe. Kathy Davidson was teaching at Duke at the time, and she offered this course. It was a Coursera MOOC, a course taught in person at Duke, a course taught in person at Stanford, and a course taught in person at UC Santa Barbara, and then connected through Google. There was also a Twitter, I don't know how to put it. It was effectively like a trolling course. The aim of the course was to sort of undermine the official Coursera MOOC with a Twitter-based conversation critiquing the design of a closed sphere of higher education. So I was like really like in this course, I was a PhD candidate. I was in my last semester on campus, and I was very much like, wow, this is like nothing I've ever seen before. And I learned a ton from just the example that she set. So check out Kathy Davidson if you don't know her. But beyond that, I'll say like it took me a long time to find my way sort of back to it. Not long after I finished my PhD, I did a postdoc in Ireland. I was a faculty member at the University of the Sciences for about 8 years prior to their closure and a merger. Not long after I got tenure, I decided that it was time for me to leave higher ed, in part because the merger just meant that I was going to be at a new institution that I didn't quite fit with. But then also there was increasingly a feeling for me, especially through the pandemic, of being quite cut off from some of the things that I feel like nurture the humanistic impulse, something deeper than one's training, something deeper than one's field, like why you got into this in the first place in some way. So it was not long after I got here, I shopped around myself on the job market, interviewed some places, but wasn't finding anything that I really loved. Meanwhile, I was hanging out at this library as a community member and just working here, writing as one does. And I increasingly saw that this place had something special to offer. Lo and behold, an opportunity to take on a public humanities job sort of landed in my lap here. There was an NEH-seated endowment that provides for humanities work here at the library. And it just struck me as like such an optimistic and enriching opportunity to be embedded in a community, working closely with people from all different walks of life, all different ages, trying to figure out what it is that makes them connect to the humanities. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now. I've learned a ton in a very short time. The team here is very good. And it's in some ways reconnected me to some of those things I learned with Kathy back in grad school. It was not really part of my training, except that in my official program, in my classics program, but it was through the professional development arm of the graduate school, right? So very much like what you're doing in Grad Futures, I found something like this already there. So I think these units on campus can be very exciting groups to connect with in order to find connection beyond your field. I think I'll stop there for now, but I could say more.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The idea of connection and also personal passion and like the reasons why you initially did the thing to get into a PhD program. Same thing last night at our discussion on SciComm. And their joke last night was talking about, you didn't get into doing a PhD in the sciences because, and then they used two very distinct things that I had no idea what they were talking about. But I can imagine the equivalent would be you didn't get into the humanities to move the knowledge of one little subset of one microscopic section of 19th century American literature 1 inch forward, right? Our reasons are usually much bigger and broader than that. And sometimes I hear from graduate students as they're ending their dissertation that they are they've done a project that they wouldn't have wanted to do in the beginning, and they're kind of done with it at the end, rather than feeling inspired to go on and write another book or another article in their area. So it seems that sometimes the centering of the personal passion, the excavating of what ties you to the humanities, is something we can't skip that step, I don't think. And I think you've all kind of highlighted that so far. Jeremy, please unmute and share your personal journey with the humanities.
Of course. Hello, everyone. So a couple of years ago, as I was trying to crank out content for my dissertation, and still am, I found that one of the most creative and fulfilling outlets for my research was actually making videos. So I started a small YouTube channel and fell in love with the video making process. I became involved with media teams on campus as well. So first with the Center for Culture, Society, and Religion, then with Middle Ages for Educators, and now I'm spearheading a graduate videography workshop series with Grad Futures. So through these experiences, I picked up a few skills in videography, editing, and digital storytelling. But I didn't join these teams just to make some videos. I joined because they were public-facing initiatives. I wanted to engage as many people as possible with my historical interests, and video was the most powerful tool for that purpose, and I still believe it is. I studied complex materials and texts, institutions, and power structures from a distant bygone time that no one really thinks about anymore. And early in my early in my graduate school experience, I felt this disconnect between the richness of that history and its limited visibility in the public.
Mhm.
So I started learning about digital storytelling, and over time, videography became a core part of my toolkit. And it wasn't about simplifying the work that I researched, but it was about opening doors to it. So through Grad Futures, I worked with other grad students to produce videos that let their research, breathe a little bit outside of academic walls. So public humanities matter to me because they center the idea that knowledge should circulate widely. That the value of our research grows when it becomes part of different public shared narratives. When I see a student engage with medieval trade maps, or hear a colleague explain their work in a short, compelling video, the elevator pitch, I'm constantly reminded that scholarship is ultimately about effective communication and wide distribution and democratization. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was great. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the history of the PhD, at least in North America. It really doesn't emerge. We don't really train PhDs in the US until the late 19th century. I think Yale gives the first PhD in the US in like 1860 something. But most Americans went to Germany and elsewhere to get PhD level training. And when, ACLS, I think, is founded in 1900. Princeton's graduate school is founded in 1900. A lot of the institutions emerge at the dawn of the 20th century, as do the disciplines, or disciplinary associations, I should say. And it's interesting, if you go back to that moment, we wouldn't have to have this kind of explaining about why we want to do work that engages with a wide array of audiences. If I chart my own personal academic lineage, which is a fraught pursuit, but if I do it, I go back 3 or 4 generations and I get to a scholar by the name of Boynton, who got a deanship at Chicago without ever earning a PhD, and was a professor of English and published in MLA or PMLA. But he also was on the Chautauqua lecture circuit. He wrote a high school textbook. He eventually had a radio show called Talking About Books. And he was not punished for this, nor did people have to figure out how to reward this work. It was assumed that this was a good. And now I think we're getting back to that moment, but I think one of the things I try to impress upon faculty is knowing the histories of your own particular disciplines and subdisciplines is really helpful to seeing new ways forward, because we've abandoned a lot of the flexibility that each of you have described so far. And we've also looked at PhDs who go on to careers that are not tenure track careers as somehow lesser or other. And in fact, some of the most successful writers, let's take, there's some Harvard professors who, once they make enough money off their books, they stop teaching because that's the thing they really wanted to do all along. And I think centering the desires of the PhD students who are on the call, our alums, is really important, and knowing our pasts. Ed, you're back. I'm glad. Can you give us your personal journey with the humanities?
It began when I was in high school, and my math teacher, Ms. Hendrickson, said of a convoluted proof that I offered that why go to Milwaukee to go across town, and I made things the long way, and my career since then has been the long way. I really always wanted to be a public humanist. And for me, advanced scholarship was a way to do that. And for a while, it worked very, very well. Now, when I was a senior, I wrote for the Princeton Alumni Weekly, and one of my essays was picked up by Time Magazine. They sent a photographer. I had most of a page in Time Magazine before I was 21. So those first 15 minutes are very hard to forget. But I thought, no, this is no way to make a living. You can't make a living as a writer. I have to become a respectable professor first. And at first, it went very, very well. I had scholarships, fellowships, junior fellowship of the Harvard Society of Fellows. And then I discovered something about my hyper-specialized dissertation, which was about 4 years in German history, public disorders. I had a hypothesis, and this was a quantitative dissertation, and the hypothesis was wrong. But I got my degree. But what I saw was that I really was not cut out for the life of a monographic scholar, especially of a social historian who had to dig for years and years in archives to reconstruct what any little kid would know growing up in a village in 19th century Germany. I decided I really was not fit for that, but what was I fit for? So that was a crisis for me. It was a really, really difficult time. But fortunately, that happened to me when I was relatively young, and I learned how to pull myself out of that. And one way of doing that was working as a research assistant for one of my professors, William McNeill. That book became the best-selling Plagues and Peoples, which is still a landmark in the history of pandemics. And with that and another assistant position, I somehow was qualified to be science editor of Princeton University Press. I got the job versus I was told 60 PhDs who applied. So that's a nice thing about humanities, that I knew the world of books and I could help scientists write books in a way that other scientists might not be able to do. And one of those books, which other publishers had given up on, was Richard Feynman's last scientific book, QED, which sold 300,000 copies or more. That was the last time I looked. So once you've published Feynman's last book, what are you going to do in scientific publishing? And so I started thinking further, and I said, maybe this is time for me to go back to public humanities. And I wrote a successful Guggenheim application, that and an excellent agent who coordinated an auction between Knopf and Disney helped me go independent in 1991. And the course that I taught last fall, which I'm teaching again on understanding disasters in the Princeton Freshman Seminars program, was the first salaried position that I had in about 33 years. So I was able to support myself through really through translations, through lecturing, through consulting. Generally, the things, many of them things I'd never thought of that I had not solicited at all, but people read what I did, including John Kennedy Jr., who invited me to write for George. So it was a really thrilling experience. And now my collected essays are going to be published next month by the American Philosophical Society Press. Now, that was a fantasy. I had never thought anything like that would ever happen. So I think the lesson from that is that I learned to make friends with chaos, that life is a series of really weird things that happen one after another, some of them fortunate, some of them unfortunate. It's a sequence of things. There is no order. I don't see any order, particularly in what is happening today around the world. It's a series of flukes that we miss. I think we overinterpret as trends. Maybe that's the good news. And I think I would summarize with the concept that was popularized by Nietzsche of amor fati, love your fate. And that's been my philosophy.
Well, thanks, Ed. That's very inspiring, and also I like the idea of giving up a little bit instead of trying to plan everything so painstakingly, because it is a moment where we have to give up on the idea that there are pathways and tracks and roads ahead of us, and yield to the idea that we need to develop a portfolio of skills, a portfolio approach to life. Thank you for that. Let's go back quickly through the panelists again with our second question, and I see questions being added to the Q&A, so we'll pivot to those soon. But just quickly, there are a lot of graduate students here. There are a lot of people here who work with graduate students. Some of you are graduate students. Some of you are recent graduate students. If you could go back now, and I already know Ed's answer because he shared it with me before, but if you could go back now and meet yourself on the first day of graduate school, Yassine, what would you do differently knowing what you know now, if anything?
Yes, that's that's a very good question. What I would do differently? Probably, I guess, approaching research in a very different way. That's probably what I would do. When I came here at Princeton, I think that's the case for many grad students too. Is you're here to learn how to publish and do a lot of research, and then do your PhD, and you have that track that everyone knows before you come, but these are actually other ways of having an impact on the community around you, and everything that you do when you spend time in the library, when you write, when you do research. This can have a broader impact while also keeping the original impact that you wanted to have when you publish, when you share that with the research community, etc. But this, all the time that you can put, can also be thought with the idea of how can this be used with the broader community, or with people that are around me in the town, and also just other departments, etc. And one of the things that maybe I wish I could have thought of before was also the different audience that could read, or that could engage with whatever I want to publish, whatever I want to organize, including events, etc. Yeah. If I want to link that with what I'm doing here, and it's always difficult to talk about one's project without advertising it, because that's not the case. But for the example of the film festival is, and I think John Paul mentioned at the beginning, is what when you organize events, and there are two types of public humanities projects. There's something that you can organize, and the audience is just a receiver, and then there is nothing happening. Then sometimes there are good projects that are happening there, but there are also other types of projects where you actually ask or you think of how the audience can actually engage with whatever you do, and that's very much the idea that we are doing this year with the film festival. The first two editions, I think they had some aspect of public humanities, of course, with the public being engaged and many other things. But this year, I think we've changed that a little bit, because having a film festival in a university settings is different from, other film festivals, which are, mainly in the entertainment industry. But for us and the university, it's educational. We're doing research. So we want the public not just to enjoy, but also to engage with whatever we want to do. So instead of just having, movies, showing them and that's it, but basically, and sometimes Q&As, we thought, taking movie, putting sorry, at the center of many other things that are related to it. So research, for instance, there will be a symposium, art, so cinema and art exhibitions. There will be two with that. Cinema and music too, how to think the relationship between them, a book discussion. And there's also a very exciting, project that we, designed with, the public library and other institutions, including the Being Human festivals, which are, helping us and funding us this project, which is, taking cinema, for the case of the film festival, taking cinema and seeing how cinema has marked the university. So having a guided tour through Princeton that is open to everyone, so people can, see Princeton through a different lens, which is the lens of cinema. So how filmmakers have been filming Princeton, how Princeton has been filmed, and how has Princeton been represented in cinema, etc. So this is very much the idea, taking cinema, putting it at the center, and having, other aspects of it that may be of interest to people. You mentioned also some projects that we have with schools too, so taking cinema and films to schools and providing, screenwrites, for instance, if they need, providing some training to teachers who are not, familiar with teaching films, etc. So this is the idea, and this is linked to questions. So thinking of how one's research, one's interests, and one's time can be used, not just for very specific aspect, but for the broader community and having an impact, a greater impact. Yeah, I don't want to be too long, so I want to stop
Yeah,
here.
no, this
other
is great. I
people.
mean, I hear you saying you would think differently about who you're writing and thinking for. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Great. John Paul, do you want to take a swing at this one?
Sure, and I'll follow up on the last comments, which I thought were great. To say, if I could have done something differently, I would have started graduate school with a more capacious understanding of what mattered and what success looked like. When I think many graduate students coming into programs think they're brought there, and it's a competitive process to get there, and that they're all mostly focusing on research that is, to your point earlier, James, about moving in a narrow direction to make an incremental contribution to knowledge, and that is incredibly important. So much is built on those contributions to knowledge in the broader public arena, but I ended up hiding and not talking about some other interests that I had. I was consistently working with the Philadelphia Orchestra while I was at Penn, because I had worked there before I came to graduate school, and had continued to maintain connections with these other cultural organizations. And I ended up thinking that those two things were unrelated. That the research that I was doing was not related to the broader commitments, personal, social, community commitments that I had. And that, I think, made me less capable as I was finishing my dissertation to, I was not able to convey how it all fit together. Because it does fit together. We're not just brains floating out in space without attachments, where we have all of these different connections that are helping us make decisions about what we're studying and why it's important to us, and how it can fit together into a broader context. And when I finally was moving out of graduate school and went to the federal government, and moving to the Voice of America for my first stint in the federal government, I had to actually retrain myself to think about how the work I was doing on ancient tyrants and intellectuals in the ancient Mediterranean world actually, I could connect that to thinking about knowledge ecosystems in authoritarian countries that the Voice of America was trying to break into. And it took me a lot longer than it should have taken me had I allowed those two things to exist and to let those connections sort of nurture each other between the work that you're doing as a researcher and the commitments you have as a human being. So I would say the more people can make those connections and can make that a public part of their graduate student lives in their departments, in their universities, in their communities, the better they're going to be prepared to think about how you can engage different publics, different audiences with the knowledge that you are really passionate about and thinking about advancing. And I think that that is something that unfortunately the cultures of graduate school for decades were not good at recognizing.
Oh, well said. I'm going to give anyone else a chance to take a swing at this question. Otherwise, we have 3 already in the chat. Michelle, please do.
I'll be really, really brief. I would have gotten a museum studies certificate to go alongside my degree. I wish I was taking classes in archiving and preservation, in curation, and philosophy of interpretation, in design. All of those things would have been beautiful additions to my current career.
So, I mean, I think these are great because one of the things I was reflecting, I obviously asked the question and I've been thinking about it myself. And one of the things I would have done differently is I would have cultivated a diverse range of interlocutors for my research questions as I was seeking to pose them to myself. And then as I was seeking to answer them in the research, and then as I was seeking to write that up and then circulate it. So I wrote a dissertation that could have engaged, it was in New York City, I could have engaged with hundreds of organizations, and I engaged primarily with about 5 people and a writing group of people. And there's specialists all over the place in New York who aren't in academic departments. And there are people who can get you to ask your questions in more nuanced ways and ways that are informed by knowledge systems that the university historically excluded. And I didn't do that. And the other thing I didn't do is I wasn't a citizen of the university. I was a citizen of my department. The clearest way I can describe this is I would have been more afraid to go to the chair's office than to go to the president's office, right? Because the president had really wasn't significant to me. The chair was very significant. The DGS was very significant. So thanks for those.
Can I briefly?
Oh,
sorry,
Sarah, please. Yeah.
Is that okay? I will be very brief, but I just want to underscore what John Paul said, which just resonated with me on every point. But I would put it a little bit differently. I mean, I love the idea of thinking expansively, and that's exactly what I wish I had done. And to Michelle's point, I wish I had taken history courses because I just launched a history podcast, and man, do I wish that I had availed myself of history courses while I was at Princeton. But another way of thinking about all of this is I just wish I had taken more chances. The point about narrowness that everybody here is talking about, I think, is so important because academia rewards us for being cautious in important ways. It rewards us for being risk averse in important ways. And so I wish that I had listened more to what appeals to me in all of the ways that John Paul was just talking about so, fluently, but to say, okay, and then take a chance, just give it a shot, because actually every good thing that has happened to me in my career broadly, but in public humanities specifically, has been because I took a chance on it, and it actually was something that I loved and was rewarding, and that it turned out I could do, and in some cases hopefully do well.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that. Cliff, I see your hand, and then we're going to go pivot to the questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, actually, I'll go ahead and take a couple of them up in my response here.
Great.
So I'll try to answer both Rachel and Joanna. But yeah, the two things that, I mean, some of this is idiosyncratic to me, but I'm trying to sort of pitch this more generally. But two of the things that strike me as important lessons that I wish I could have taught myself as a first year would have been, first of all, that everything changes. To sort of go back to this theme of Nietzsche and the Stoics and Heraclitus, Pantocrator, everything flows. So what graduate school looks like when you start is not what it will be when it ends. And it
Mm.
certainly won't be the same thing 5 years into your career. It's just going to keep changing. And that's true of academia. That's true of every area of life. The other thing I wish I'd learned and been more open to, and this will echo some of what others are saying, John Paul, Sarah, James, I wish I'd been more entrepreneurial. I wish I'd been more open to that concept. I think there's a kind of culture of siloing is one way to put it. I think there's more animosity even between the business community and humanists that is unhealthy. And it would have been better to understand that nonprofits represent a kind of space really different from the corporate sector. And I didn't really appreciate that nuance coming in. So I wish I'd been more entrepreneurial. So to your question, Rachel, that's I could say that the sorry, I think it was actually Joanna's question, and I'm not sure. But anyway, I'll drop this in here in the chat. The Humanities for All newsletter is a great way to find opportunities, not just for funding, because someone was asking, I think it was Joanna was asking after funding opportunities. You can find every month this newsletter circulates funding opportunities, job opportunities, all kinds of things like that. It's a great resource. It started at Humanities for All. I think it's at Arizona State now. Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I started that Substack, and it was a labor of love for a long time. That was just a matter of Googling and coalescing into one space. And now I think it's taken on a real community element to it where people are submitting. It's really important.
So two issues are coming up there in the questions. The one is about money, which that's a very helpful overview and a resource. The other one is that the word I'm hearing a lot is risk, chance, and one of the questions that came in is about mitigating maybe that, and Ed answered it in writing. But I wonder, Sarah, given that maybe you have had one of the most publicly known conflicts, you had a run-in with Piers Morgan, right? At some point.
I did.
I don't want to dredge up bad memories, but
Oh, it was a good memory. I
Yeah.
had a lot of fun. I put him in
a
his place.
takedown, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was great fun. Yeah, no, I was on a UK TV program called Question Time, which is a live news panel thing, and it was 3 days after Trump was elected in 2016. And I seemed to be the only person in the room who was pointing out that he was all of the things that he manifestly was already at that point, and what a disastrous choice, in my view, this had been, that my country had made. And I got home after basically denouncing him on live television in front of, I don't know, like 7 million people, and saw that Piers Morgan had retweeted a picture of me saying Ms. Churchwell is like, Ms. Churchwell was about to explode with rage or something. And I just quote tweeted him, said Professor Churchwell. And people liked it, went viral. So yeah, so I had fun. What was really interesting about that one, actually, we haven't talked about this, but is something I think it's very important for people to be aware of. We've only been talking about the benefits of public humanities, but there are risks. And particularly for women, for other vulnerable groups, there are risks. And, you know, the real problem I had was not Piers Morgan. It was the onslaught of misogyny that hit me in response to that appearance. But, you know, so I think, you know, we talk a lot here in the UK about ways of supporting people who are going into public spaces, about how can we do that appropriately? How can we make sure that people have the support and the protection that they need? But it's something I talk about with grad students who want to go into this kind of work, is that you do have to be aware. And as I said, you know, I've just launched this podcast, which is, you know, already, it's already clear that it's going to get that kind of response, and that you have to, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, you have to prepare yourself for that. You have to have the support groups in place, mechanisms in place that you need, and to understand the risks that you're undertaking. And back to our point about the benefits, why you're doing it, so that it's a very clear risk benefit analysis in your own head, and you feel comfortable with the choices that you're making, because you know that in your mind the benefits outweigh the risks, which is how I feel about it. But not everybody in a potentially vulnerable position is going to make that decision.
Yeah, well said, and thanks for that. Cami Borders has a question for Michelle. How do you manage your time, work, and balance between curation and being housed in a university?
Great question. I think about my work seasonally. So we're in winter, spring right now. Winter is my time of seeding, of reading, of resting, of researching. Spring is my time for writing. Summer is my time for taking that writing outside and editing and asking my friends their opinion, my mentors, my colleagues. And then fall is my time for socializing that work. So that's when I teach, that's when I present on panels, conferences. I try to keep that cadence throughout the year as a way of project managing my time, and know that sometimes I cannot take on a new writing project in the fall, and that come to me in the spring and maybe we can talk. So that's my short answer.
I mean, I think that's one of the most fascinating ways of organizing a year I've ever heard. It sounds sounds lovely, to be honest with you. I want to close this out maybe by just throwing this into the group, and I really want to thank everyone for their questions. There are so many resources linked in the chat. Hopefully, you were able to grab some of those links. But my last question is, if you could share one resource or model to a graduate student audience that would help them be more thoughtful, maybe more confident or more judicious, given your last comment, Sarah, about approaching the public humanities and community engaged scholarship, what would that resource be? And let's just do quick hitters so we can thank you and make sure we honor your time that you committed for an hour. So we want to do that. But who wants to kick us off? What's one resource, maybe not shared already, or maybe you want to amplify one you've already shared?
I'm going to very quickly plug the Routledge Companion to Public Humanities Scholarship. It's a coded volume with my colleague Daniel Fisher-Livney, who was the former project director of Humanities for All before me. It collects 25 case studies of public humanities projects that are housed primarily in universities, but in partnership and collaboration with communities. The case study model, it has risen to the top of the pile as like the exemplary route into learning public humanities. So I'd really encourage you to use it as a teachable resource. And for graduate students who are looking for models of doing the work, it's great. It also has a glossary in the back of public humanities terms that I think is unfinished and that I would love somebody to take up. And then for the theory wonks in the room, it also has a theory section at the beginning that lifts up terms like legibility and reciprocity and redistribution as key frameworks for the public humanities.
Thank you. That's great. And we've linked to that book in the chat. And if your library doesn't have it, make sure they buy it. John Paul.
Thank you. I would just say, in addition to that resource, which I absolutely agree with, we've shared the Humanities for All, we've shared the Routledge Companion, both excellent. I would say one resource is the one that helps you find your community, your network, and that you should be talking to people who are in those resources, who have projects in the Humanities for All compendium, asking them where they find support, where they find people to help collaborate with. That could be at a scholarly association. Many scholarly associations are actually creating sort of pathfinders and metadata tags for you to navigate conferences that are focused on the publicly engaged humanities work there. It could be something like the National Humanities Conference, which moves around every year. It'll be in Detroit this year. And it could be that you find it at your state or jurisdictional humanities council, and that you find events there and people who are coming to it or people who are collaborating there. I think this is work that is better when it's done together. And so find the people who sort of energize you. And that might be one of those spaces. It might be all of them. But if you have to choose, start asking around if people are doing great work, where do they find sort of the networks that sustain it?
Awesome. Sarah.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to say what you said, James, in the chat, which is the new Public Humanities Journal, which has launched, which I've been involved in, and also, which I think is doing really great work. And also, I am going to plug Being Human. I'm just going to share the links, both the Being Human US and Being Human UK. We particularly Being Human UK, we have toolkits, we have the case studies Michelle was talking about. We've got videos, we've got loads and loads. We have free training seminars all year round. Everybody is welcome to join them. You're all welcome. Anybody, tell your students, everybody's welcome to sign up and take part in those, where we talk everybody through both the whys, the wherefores, but also the how-to, the practicalities. How do you go about it? And really building from the ground up. How do you go from an idea to a successful public engagement, public humanities event, depending on what it is that you want to do. So there are an increasingly wide array of support systems and toolkits and training out there. So if you start looking, you'll find it. But yeah, Being Human, we've been sharing our learnings over the last 10 years.
Wonderful. I think I saw Ed and then Cliff and Yassine.
There are two online publications that I've contributed to, Eon, AEON, and Nautilus. Nautilus also is published in print, and they offer, to me, a really fascinating array of public humanities ideas. I think anybody who reads them, I certainly have been inspired by a lot that I've seen there. For example, I wrote a piece for them on the Leopold and Loeb trial and the history of ideas about insanity and criminal responsibility and neurology. So you'll find a lot of stimulating things there. Also, and that's not the end. There is the public domain review. There are really at least a half dozen excellent public humanities websites, and they have emerged as Atlantic, for example, and Harper's have become much more politically focused. They have emerged as, to me, the most interesting forums for work in the field. One more thing about politics and safety. There are two options in political writing, or in writing. The first is to be really political and to join in a movement and to be an activist. The second, which I have followed, is to be apolitical, to be inscrutable as far as your voting and your political affiliations. And it's really a matter of temperament, but there's nothing in between. You can't be slightly political anymore.
Thank you. Cliff.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just mention again the newsletter linked. Thanks, Michelle. And then I'd also like to call out, and maybe James, you can send this around later this week to the registered people if you want to. But for the last year or so, I've been putting together a resource guide on public humanities that will collect kind of like an introduction to the landscape, a bunch of books available here in Princeton, but I'm sure available also at other university libraries. And public libraries like mine, different organizations you can look to for funding. Anyway, it'll be sort of trove of materials. So I'll send that along. And James, if you're willing, maybe you can share that out.
Will do. Awesome. Last but not least, Yassine. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeremy also has his hand up.
Yes. One resource that I found very useful too was the MLA's Public Humanities Incubator that I participated in, I think last year or 2 years ago, which is, especially for grad students who have an idea of a project and then they want to develop it, and they can work with, specialists in public humanities and work like on a real on a practical project and develop it and see what could be the audience and on other projects and the problems that they may have too.
Perfect. Thank you. And Jeremy. I see you trying to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, phone was wonky. Short plug. So Middle Ages for Educators is an open access resource website for those interested in medieval stuff, curating it for secondary education classrooms and undergraduate classrooms as well. But also, this might sound unorthodox, but actually finding popular influencers and content creators on YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram, and seeing how you're not looking just for the content itself and the accuracy, of it. But just look how they style their video, the visuals they use, the way they communicate to their audiences, and that can help you be a more effective communicator with your own research and the projects you're working on. So thank
That's
you.
great. Take inspiration from where you can. Last night we had a science communication, Shane Campbell Staten, who has been two Emmy nominations already in his foray into science communication while maintaining a really vibrant lab here at Princeton in evolutionary biology. One of the things he said last night is he took training on how to be a host, how to get in front of the camera and talk to the camera rather than talk to a human, and the difference that made for him as he, pursued being a science communicator. So the resources don't need to be all rooted in the humanities or all rooted in disciplinary associations that we recognize. They can be improv classes at your local theater. They can be things that help you free yourself from maybe the calcified ways you've been articulating your work to people who already know pretty much what it is you're going to say. Angelica asked if we can share the resources. We will. Angelica will curate them and send them out. I want to ask you all. You've hung with us. Some people had to hop off, but 30 of you have stayed with us all the way through this hour. I want to please share your gratitude in the chat to our panelists, and I really thank each and every one of you for spending an hour during a very busy time of year. In these circumstances, I think it's even more important that we do this work, as John Paul emphasized before, in community. We do it with purpose, and we do it with conviction, and we do it with an eye toward larger objectives. So thanks to each one of you for sharing your stories, your passion, your insights, all these resources. I wish I had something like this when I was in graduate school. A panel like this would have had me floating, I think. But thanks each one of you for doing this, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.